welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
This is season 3 of our podcast, where every week we review a randomly chosen pro wrestling event selected via the randomizer that we fire up. It goes through all the internet's wrestling content, finds us a show to watch, could be from anywhere, anytime. And this week, we parachute into some weekly TV, and it's AWA Championship Wrestling on ESPN. So, again, the randomizer taking us to the dying days here of the AWA.
Yeah, another dying days of a promotion episode of the podcast. You may be forgiven if you did not realize that the AWA was still running shows and running TV in late 1988. Yes, this is brand new first run television. It's not like on ESPN in years later where they'd be running episodes of AWA late at night on ESPN2 many years after the promotion had died. No, this was happening in real time, and it was all part of the build to SuperClash III.
Yeah, so this is October 17th, 1988. The match is taking place in Nashville, Tennessee. Larry Nelson is our host. He welcomes us from the studio.
Larry Nelson, by the way, looks a lot like modern present day David Crockett.
He does. That's a good comp.
Short. He's a bit husky. He's got a nice gray burly beard. He welcomes us to the show, and he's joined by Lee Marshall on this broadcast. He's not beaming in. He's not calling in via 1-800-COLLECT. It is not a road report. He is right there.
No, he's also not Stagger Lee Marshall at this point. So,
that is true.
He's here. Lee Marshall runs down tells us about the SuperClash III main event in Chicago. Now, we'll get to, I think, do you want to talk about SuperClash at the top of the show, or should we save it for the end? I think we should save it for the end.
I think we'll just hit it as it's natural. We might as well talk about it here as we go through at the very beginning of this show. Probably the most noteworthy thing that happens on this episode of AWA TV is Lee Marshall hosting in a separate studio from the main studio, a 2-studio broadcast. I always enjoy that. But he has world-class championship wrestling president Frank Dusek. He has Jerry Jarrett of the CWA, Stanley Blackburn of the AWA, and he has 2 world champions, Kerry Von Erich of World Class and the AWA world champion Jerry Lawler. They're all in this very small room, and they have something to tell everybody.
Yeah, they're here to do a contract signing, and both men sign the paper, and Lee Marshall and folks go to interview Kerry. Kerry Von Erich's the first one. He just wants to get it on right now. Jerry the King Lawler says this is long overdue. You had an accident where you were laid up in bed for a year, and you had a dream about unifying these titles. Well, it will be a nightmare as you're going to lose your title in Chicago. So, referencing Kerry Von Erich's motorcycle accident where he lost his foot.
Which we talked about quite a bit on that episode of 1987 World Class Television. And we should note on that episode of World Class TV, it was all about the build to Kerry Von Erich coming back on Christmas Day in 1987. Here we are some 10 months later in 1988. And he is the world-class world champion.
Yeah, it's amazing he was able to get that title away from the likes of Brian Adias and Al Perez. Yeah,
my go-to, sadly, Al Perez, always my go-to when I talk about a less than stellar champion in a failing promotion and what that says about everything. This I thought was really good. Kerry Von Erich, he just... He said he wanted to go. He starts to get up. Frank Dusek stops him. He says, "Let's go right now. Save yourself the embarrassment." Jerry Lawler, as he ran down, I thought that was a very good understated Jerry Lawler promo.
Yep.
The one thing about this that, again, kind of like the idea of Al Perez being the champion of your promotion in 1987. When you're doing this thing about unifying it, and finally we're going to only have one world title. You know what this reminded me of? It reminded me of the Ric Flair versus Sting unification match.
We reviewed that show.
Yes. From Clash of the Champions in, what was it, June 94? Of 1994, leading into Bash at the Beach 94, where the announcers were going so hard talking about how, we're finally going to have this. Bobby Heenan said this is the moment he had waited his entire life for in wrestling. Only one champion, one true world champion. And like everyone knew the WWF existed. And it's the same thing here. Like I admire what they're trying to do, but anyone who is going to go to the effort of watching AWA in late 1988 is a pretty hardcore wrestling fan at that point. So they know that the NWA World Heavyweight title exists. They know that the WWF Championship exists. So everyone playing, like, they're in this weird world where they're acknowledging titles that are outside of their promotion, but they're not acknowledging the titles outside of their promotion that are not on the line here. And they're trying to sort of convince everybody that this is to settle who is the one true world heavyweight champion. Like, I just don't know exactly who this was for or who they thought they were fooling, but it was well executed in a vacuum of what this promo was. But yeah, the story leaves a little to be desired.
Yeah. And we've ran down the history of the AWA territory.
Yes.
If you go back to any of our episodes in season 1 and 2 of this podcast, plenty of AWA content. We opened those shows running down the history of AWA.
Are there too many people, or are there that many people doing podcasts that can say plenty of AWA content?
Yeah, sorry for the humble brag.
And still have listeners. Again, there were good things about the AWA at times, but most of what we've reviewed here in this podcast, not the high and mighty times of the AWA outside of that one 1983 show.
But yeah, I mean, Rod Trongard is the highlight of AWA.
Sadly not on this show. But yeah, if you're looking for random shows from the dying days of the AWA, boy, have I got a podcast for you. It's random episodes of Wrestling at Random.
And same goes for World Class. So you go back to our archives and we ran down the history of World Class, the promotion, different times throughout the promotion.
He's the randomizer Vince McMahon. Because think about all these shows that we've watched, whether it be, you mentioned the late stage AWA, late stage World Class, late stage ECW, those Pro Wrestling Plus or Pro Wrestling This Week shows that basically chronicle how completely dead and barren the territory landscape is in the mid to late 80s. Those are all things that I imagine Vince McMahon would watch and feel good about if no one else would.
If we didn't also bookend it with like that 83 AWA show, that World Class show from where Fritz von Erich and the Great Kabuki had a match, like we were able to bookend it. So if it was just slanted towards the dying days, that'd be one thing. But we do have moments we do visit the glory days here and there. So.
A cynical person would say that Vince McMahon would throw those few things in to get people off the scent of what his true goal was at the randomizer, but I digress.
So the true goal here to unify the championships, will that be enough to make SuperClash III the big event that they expected to be in Chicago? And we'll run through here as more of the card emerges. This is the main event, obviously, and we'll get to the rest of it.
Well, what I think actually the time to really go through and talk about what happened with SuperClash would be after the Lee Marshall SuperClash 3 update.
Yep,
the control center of sorts. I think that'll serve as a nice launching pad to talk about everything that happened with SuperClash. The thing that I'm disappointed most about so far early on in this episode of AWA TV from 1988 is that we go to commercials, but we just get a tease of the commercials.
I know.
They're cut out. They're not in here. Very disappointed. I wanted to see what was being advertised on ESPN in October of 1988 when AWA television was on. But
that's a good point, because ESPN is not the ESPN you think of it as today in 1988. So this was a network trying to grow from regional to national, and trying to add additional content here, and that's how professional wrestling got onto ESPN,
like it did with cable to begin with, or the proliferation of UHF stations many decades prior. It was really always pro wrestling that would be one of the things that new forms of television technology, or however you want to say it, would latch onto. We don't get the full commercials, but when we come back from this commercial break, what do we see? A very young and a little bit smaller, but still in great shape, Scott Steiner is in the ring.
That's Scott Steiner. And
the earliest Scott Steiner that we've seen yet.
Yeah, this is 1988 Scott Steiner. He's got just black trunks on and white boots. So doesn't have like the singlet you're used to seeing Scott Steiner in, but still incredibly jacked.
Yes.
Very
great mullet.
Yeah, looks exactly like a young Scott Steiner would look.
Yeah, if you watch Scott Steiner in 1991 and you imagine what would Scott Steiner look 3 years prior to that, it's pretty much exactly this. He's kind of got young lion gear.
Yes,
which is amusing.
I was looking at him and I'm like, this is 1988. This is the end of 1988, right? Can you think of someone who had more of a transformation in 10 years than 88 Scott Steiner to 98 Scott Steiner?
Well, even 3 years later, let's go back, let's say 3.5 years later into the WCW New Japan Super Show.
Yep.
I guess actually less than 3 years, because the first Super Show was in 1991. So about 2.5 years. Think about Scott Steiner teaming with Rick against Hase and Sasaki.
I love thinking about that. One of my favorite matches.
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of my favorite matches of all time as well. We talked about it, I believe. Was that on the Patreon?
On the Patreon, yeah. That's bonus content over there.
A full review of the Super Show. But yeah, I mean, the transformation, yes, from here to Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner some 10 years later, it is quite the metamorphosis. Not sure which is the butterfly, which is the moth, which is the caterpillar, whatever that whole thing is. But
speaking of guys who went through a transformation, here's the international TV champion, Rugged Ronnie Garvin, who just a year prior was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And now here he is in the AWA as the International TV Champion.
And then he would shortly, about a year after this, less than a year after this, he would be a mid-carder in the WWF.
Mm-hmm. Crazy, the fall of Ronnie Garvin.
Yeah, it kind of went all over the place in a very short period of time. The thing I noted as we saw the entrances is that there was a surprisingly decent crowd, it appeared, at least on this very lo-fi VHS sourced YouTube video of this show. I expected it to be far worse when you consider some of the crowds we've seen for these late stage AWA shows. It didn't feel like a completely dead territory from this footage.
We're told that Ronnie Garvin won this TV championship by defeating Greg Gagne for the title.
Oh, and this will not be the only Greg Gagne content we'll get here on this show. We'll get into him a little bit later. Greg Gagne had won the tournament, the inaugural tournament for the international television title by defeating Adrian Adonis, which I can only imagine what that match would have looked like in 1988.
Yeah, he passed away shortly thereafter that match. So that's pretty crazy. And here we've got this is a fast match. Quick slam by Scott, and then a punch by Garvin. The Garvin stomp is the second move of the match.
It's like 18 seconds into the match. That body slam from Scott Steiner is the only offense he'll have. As you mentioned, Garvin hits the big overhand chop. Garvin stomp. Scott missed something, and it was really weird.
Yeah, he just came flying across the screen and crashed and burned as Garvin moved out of the way.
It goes into that Hall of Fame, that Mount Rushmore of crazy camera shots of wrestlers just flying across your static shot. We always talk about from the Ric Flair, Terry Funk, I Quit match, that great shot of Flair flying across the screen onto Funk's back. I always think of Rob Van Dam flying into the screen with the 5-star frog splash onto, I believe it was Hayabusa or Jinsei Shinzaki. I can't remember which, in Heatwave 98. This is right up there with it, and maybe even higher on that list, because it's impossible to tell even what was happening. Just a streak of young baby Scott Steiner flying across the ring and missing something.
We get a big punch by Ronnie Garvin. He sits on the chest of Scott Steiner.
The most gentle northern exposure. The most gentle northern exposure we've ever seen here on this show.
1 minute, 52-second squash here for Ron Garvin.
It was something to see Ron Garvin squash Scott Steiner, who, yes, looked young, but still looked like Scott Steiner. To see him get almost no offense at all, lose in less than 2 minutes, was weird. And I guess Ronnie Garvin is a heel. That's what we're led to believe.
Heel Ronnie Garvin, as Larry Nelson interviews Greg Gagne, who talks about Garvin, and he says Garvin's nickname is the Hands of Steel. And I'm like, no, it is not, Greg. He's the Hands of Stone. What are you doing?
And it's not as though there was some copyright issue, and so in the AWA they had to refer to him as the Hands of Steel. No, they had referred to him, the announcers, that being Frank Dusek and Lee Marshall, had referred to him as the Hands of Stone in the prior segment. Greg Gagne, we'll get to it in his match. I almost feel bad for the guy because he's not a terrible wrestler, but he's just such a dork. And during this period of wrestling more than any other, meaning the mid to late 80s, where, just having muscles and the big jacked up bodies, that was everything. The idea that he was this pushed wrestler contending for championships in a supposedly major promotion, it really fell flat. His promos similarly flat. He ends this by saying, "I want you, young man, back in the ring for that title," with far less conviction than I just said it. He wants a rematch at SuperClash III. He talks about how Gagne says that he obviously had something in his hand when he punched Gagne and knocked him out. So meaning that Garvin had
a weapon of some kind here,
an object of some sort. We may or may not learn more about that later on this podcast. But what comes next?
Do you think that Greg Gagne, Eric Watts, David San Martino, do you think there would, if social media existed in the late 80s, would there have been like a photo of them at a bar together that would have just broke the internet of the day? And
then somewhere on the other end of the bar, sitting by himself, is Bret Hart with just a smirk on his face, like, I got all the talent and they got none of it. Speaking of talent,
here we go. Yeah,
a man who has all of a sudden become maybe the mascot of season 3 of this podcast after not appearing
Bruno.
at all in season 1 and 2. I guess between season 3 and recent episodes on the bonus feed, Downtown Bruno / Harvey Whippleman. We cannot escape this man.
He is everywhere. Yes,
he's managing all forms of Sid Vicious throughout his career. Here he is managing a man that I had completely forgotten ever existed, and in some ways was like the symbol of bad ESPN wrestling. Gorgeous Gary Young, who
what a zero. Gorgeous.
He is a total nothing. His perm, though.
Oh, rock solid for 88.
Beautiful perm with the mustache. It is a look. But yeah, here it's fine because he is a jobber. Yes. In later years on promotions that were televised on ESPN, he would be one of the top pushed guys, and that was always hard to believe. Here, he is just cannon fodder for the world-class championship wrestling champion, Kerry Von Erich.
Yeah, the music hits. We hear White Snake's Still of the Night. The crowd is singing along to the White Snake Still of the Night, and out comes Kerry Von Erich. He's a world-class heavyweight champion, and he is popular. These folks in Nashville are excited to see Kerry.
Yeah, don't ever let anyone tell you that Kerry Von Erich was only over in Dallas.
Nope.
That's not the case, and that clearly is on display here in Nashville.
So he's in the ring, Bruno's on the apron, and Kerry just waffles him with a discus punch.
Immediately. These matches are hilarious. The first match, we had Ronnie Garvin doing the Garvin stomp as the second move of the match. And then here, the first thing that happens is what usually is the crescendo of an old school face versus heel match where the heel has the manager, that being the heel being up on the apron and the face knocking them off. That starts the proceedings.
Young jumps Kerry from behind. Kerry fights back with punches. Discus punch. Gary Young hits a crossbody off the middle rope. Kerry rolls through and gets the pin. Another short squash.
Just like that. To me, the most noteworthy thing and the most interesting thing about this match or this segment was on commentary, where Frank Dusek says that Kerry Von Erich has beaten Ric Flair, which I vividly remember as a very young child.
Former NWA heavyweight champion, winning that match in Texas.
One of my first memories ever of seeing pro wrestling was seeing that on TV as like a 3 or 4 year old. Hulk Hogan, which I highly doubt that's accurate, that Kerry Von Erich ever defeated Hulk Hogan. And this is in 1980. Like I find that very hard to believe,
unless it was like both in their rookie season, both as children. Hogan coming through the territory on his way to the AWA from Florida, coming to lose a match along the way.
The timelines still don't really seem to add up, but who knows? And then also that he has beaten Randy Savage, which just seems hard to believe. I'm going to take a page from some of our Patreon shows, bonus content shows that we do. I'm going to do some on-air research.
Good.
And see if I can find this out, because then they also say that Jerry Lawler has defeated Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. The Savage one I completely believe.
Yeah, I remember that was a big deal with the Memphis feud with the Kentucky Outlaw ICW promotion that Angelo Poffo, his father, ran. So I remember that. So I totally assumed that happened. But yeah,
Hogan
the others,
one seems a little more dubious. But the Kerry Von Erich stuff, I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, you do that. I'll talk about Larry Nelson again interviewing Jerry the King Lawler. He says that the big news here. This is a unification match, so one of these organizations will lose claim to having a world champion. So
I would make the argument that they had each already lost a legitimate claim to having a world champion before the titles were unified. But
very true. And then we just cut to Sergeant Slaughter, who's cutting a promo telling you to come to SuperClash III. He's got his G.I. Joe patch on his camouflage jacket. He's in full G.I. Joe mode here, Sergeant Slaughter.
He also somehow looks older here than he would in his 91-92 WWF run, which is bizarre. And apparently, the only, at least on Cage Match, the only interactions in ring between Hulk Hogan and Kerry Von Erich that are listed were all battle royals in the WWF. The 91 Royal, the 91 Royal Rumble, a house show 20-man battle royal at the Omaha Civic Center in 1991, and the 1992 Royal Rumble. So when I look up Kerry Von Erich versus Hulk Hogan, there is a question on Quora.com, that bastion of accuracy, and someone asks, is it true that Hulk Hogan once wrestled and defeated Hulk Hogan before the Hulkamania era? So I'm assuming this person who asked this question on Quora 7 months ago had watched the same episode of AWA
same
TV
questions we did.
Yes. And so here's a sample of the answers. Danny Paul, who says that he's watched wrestling for 40 years, says if Hogan went through the Texas territory, then yes, Fritz always made sure his sons went over. Eddie Friend, who tells us that he's been watching pro wrestling since 1984, says that it's doubtful. He says that he never heard of Hogan working a world class. Jerry Lawler beat him, but Lawler beat everyone in Memphis. Tony Schlappick, a wrestling fan from 1992.
Tony Slapowitz?
No. I appreciate the attempt. Said that he doesn't think they ever wrestled each other. He said, to the best of my knowledge, Kerry came in the late 70s before he was featured acting world class. Kerry was wrestling in Florida, Kansas City, All Japan. Basically, their paths never crossed before the WWF. One person says they think maybe because Hogan and Brody wrestled on a show that Kerry Von Erich was on, so maybe their paths had crossed. So I don't know. That's the closest I could get. The unassailable source that is Quora.com is the only information.
Well, we'll turn it over to our listeners who also have quite a few years of wrestling experience. If you guys know of any Kerry Von Erich Hulk Hogan match that's not a battle royal in the 90s, tell us, shoot us a message on Twitter, Instagram, email, smoke signals, or a fax.
Call the
Send
Wrestling
us
at Random hotline. Get your parents' permission for that.
$1.65 a minute.
Yeah, $1.65 a second. There's a special Patreon tier for that. What I'm really hoping is that either Eddie Friend or Tony Schlappik are listeners. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
It's totally possible, and they'd be this deep into this AWA episode.
Absolutely.
And now we're
maybe the only two. We're
to the point where Lee Marshall is talking about the SuperClash III card from the event center, the control center. It's at the UIC. Can we
talk for a moment about how Lee Marshall looks here? Because when we saw Lee Marshall, he's very tan. He has an incredible mullet, but he's the exact same size and shape that he was in the mid-90s in WCW. So it's kind of an incredible look. He also tells us that the SuperClash III is coming from, quote, the world famous UCI Pavilion.
It is the UIC Pavilion, the University of Illinois at Chicago Pavilion, which is a lot of famous shows. Tell me, Adam, I know I want you to tell the listeners your favorite shows you've seen in person at the UIC Pavilion.
Oh, well, it's undoubtedly my first ever wrestling show, which I've told the story in bits and pieces here on this podcast before. But May 3rd, 1992, I saw my first ever live wrestling show after many years of trying to convince my parents to let me go. It was at the UIC Pavilion, third row. Highlights were a fight breaking out in the crowd directly next to me during Big Van Vader versus Nikita Koloff, when I was one of only a couple people cheering for Vader in that match. Maybe that's why the fight started. I don't know. Main event was at a house show of all things, the Steiner brothers defeating Bobby Eaton and Arn Anderson to win the World Tag Team titles in a steel cage. And the opener of the show, my first ever live wrestling match, was a very green, just transitioning from being a manager, Diamond Dallas Page taking on Michael P.S. Hayes in a singles match. So that was my first show, and then WCW would go there every couple of months for the next year or so. I saw Kensuke Sasaki wrestle there on his excursion from New Japan. I believe it was Dr. Dusty Williams and Terry Gordy against Wyndham and Rhodes for the tag titles. I got to see a lot of stunning Steve Austin, who was my favorite wrestler back then. So yeah, a lot of good times. Just a few years after, I should say, SuperClash III rolled into the UIC/UCI Pavilion.
Yeah, I saw my first live pay-per-view event there. I saw Halloween Havoc 91. Which
91, it was that horrible Chamber of Horrors show.
Sorry, 90.
I would not be jealous of you if you had been at 91, but you were at 90 with that awesome Steiner Brothers Nasty Boys match.
90 with the Steiner Brothers Nasty Boys for the U.S. tag titles. The Stan Hansen defeating Lex Luger for the U.S. title.
Barry Windham as a fake Sting.
And we had the Black Scorpion out there with making an appearance, and crazy Sid Vicious versus Sting main event. A horrible some horrible matches on the undercard, but no, that was my first live pay-per-view, and I saw it. It was also one of the first concerts that my parents let me go to, just with a friend driving me downtown. Nice. And we got to go 9 Inch Nails in 94-ish.
Oh, wow.
9 Inch Nails headlining with Hole and Marilyn Manson as the opening acts.
Oh, so a nice chill NPR smooth jazz sort of thing.
It was a great show. I loved 9 Inch Nails in the early 90s there. So good times. UIC Pavilion.
Yeah, the only concert I should say that I saw at UIC Pavilion was, I think it might have actually been this band's last tour, the one and only time I saw them, Oasis.
Oh, good. Nice. I saw Primus there. I saw Green Day there. I've seen a lot of shows at the UIC Pavilion, and wrestling, of course, a ton of wrestling. The NWA WCW would run that until the Nitro days, when they would move to the United Center.
Well, yeah, and they actually I think they ran one Nitro at the Allstate Arena, formerly known as the Rosemont Horizon, that dump. which was in that like weird month where Hulk Hogan was wearing black because the Dungeon of Doom drove him crazy. That era of shows, but yeah, a fun building. Not a whole lot of wrestling happens there now. I think the last I can remember any combat sports sort of thing was a WEC show that happened shortly before the UFC did away with that company entirely.
SuperClash III at the UIC Pavilion drew 1,672 people.
While you keep talking, I'm going to look up and see what my first wrestling show, some 3.5 years later, drew. Drew.
So just to tell you how far this had fallen, the original SuperClash in 1985, just 3 years earlier, had drawn 20,000 people to Comiskey Park, the home of the Chicago White Sox on the South Side. They had drawn 20,000 people for just 3 years. Later, they can't draw more than 1,600 for a title unification match between the AWA and World Class. Absolutely unbelievable how it did 45,000 buys on pay-per-view, and this was the only AWA event to be held on pay-per-view.
Did you know that there's a WCW show, a house show, 15 days after this in that same building that drew almost 3,000 people? And you are going to be shocked when you see when I tell you what, Jesus, this is the card for the WCW show that almost doubled the SuperClash in attendance 15 days later in 1988. Dustin Rhodes and Kendall Windham against the Commandos. Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose, the New Midnight Express, defeated the Fantastics. Abdul the Butcher defeated Bam Bam Bigelow. Fourth from the top was Ric Flair against Rick Steiner that went to a 30-minute draw. Then I'm guessing the semi-main event was the real main event, as it was Lex Luger, Sting, and Dusty Rhodes defeating Barry Windham and the Road Warriors. And then, well, I guess this makes sense. The main event was a bunkhouse stampede match, which was a big draw back then. Larry Zbyszko won the bunkhouse stampede to send the people home happy.
God.
So yeah, that was 15 days later in 1988.
Yeah, this card was brutal. So SuperClash 3, they run down this card. They don't tell you the matches in this event center. They just tell you who's going to be there. But when we look at the matches, terrible. You had Chavo Mondo and Hector Guerrero defeating Cactus Jack and the Rock and Roll RPMs, which is Mike Davis and Tommy Lane.
That's another one of those, like, the territory isn't great when it's the Rock and Roll RPMs, right?
And
Jesus,
then
12 matches. Holy crap.
Yeah, Eric Embry defeated Jeff Jarrett for the World Class Light Heavyweight title
in 4 minutes and 13 seconds. I don't know what's more shocking, that match time or the fact that Eric Embry was a light heavyweight. He would be much heavier later. We then have 24 seconds. The Boogie Woogie Man, pretending that he's squashing the Road Warriors here, defeats Wayne Bloom. Like I said, 24 seconds. These matches, there's only one match on this show that goes longer than 8.5 minutes.
The average time is 5 minutes. Every one of these matches is 5 minutes, 5:40, 5:50. They're all 5-minute matches. Iceman King Parsons defeats Brickhouse Brown. Wendy Richter and the Top Guns defeated Bad Company and Medusa
in a match that was a mixed tag for the AWA Women's and AWA World Tag Team Championship.
Greg Gagne defeated Ronnie Garvin for the international television title, but by a countout.
But I guess since it was a decision match because it was vacant for some reason, he got the belt. We then have this was let's wait for the rest of this.
We'll tease the rest of the card. That's the opening. Then enjoy your intermission. We'll come back as we get to get to the details later. We got Bill Apter from PWI interviewing Robert Gibson of the Rock and Roll Express.
Robert Gibson in a sweet red and white Pro Wrestling Illustrated t-shirt that probably as a child would have been my holy grail.
Oh, that was a sweet shirt.
The t-shirt. I didn't need Robert Gibson with it.
Not the holy grail of Robert Gibson. He says that the Rock and Roll did not split up.
This was confusing.
A listener or a reader question asking if the Rock and Rolls ever wrestled each other. He says they did, but Robert wouldn't say who won.
Yep, they wrestled in Huntsville.
Yeah, we know Robert did not win that match. There's no universe where they put Robert Gibson over Ricky Morton.
Yeah, they say it happened. He says it happened in Huntsville. He refuses to say who won in a way that tells you 100% who won. We then go from there.
What is this segment?
This is a segment that it may be the first and only thing that rivaled that doctor segment with the two doctors in the gym with
talking
the flowers,
about fitness and nutrition,
about rest helps, and they went on and on and on about this. This is the AWA Celebrity Corner, and at this point, I'm just
weird.
Imagining, like, is it Ricky Rackman? Like, who is going to be the celebrity? The celebrity is, in fact, major motion picture star Jodie Foster.
And
so I'm like,
wow.
Jodie Foster was a wrestling fan?
No.
Shocking. Tell me more.
No, Jodie Foster, star of The Accused, being interviewed by Barry Bands in this week's Celebrity Corner.
By the way, Barry Bands sounds like the star athlete in a knockoff baseball video game that did not have MLB licensing or clearance.
Barry is making statements to the celebrity Jodie Foster. He's asking questions to the celebrity Jodie Foster. And he's doing it as a guy who has clearly not seen or been briefed on this movie whatsoever. She was a little taken aback, but then a total pro and saves the interview. Unbelievable. This guy, Barry, came off like such a clown, and Jodie Foster, a total pro.
It's uncomfortable does not begin to describe this. So this movie is about a woman who is assaulted, and there's another woman who's helping her or not helping her. It's hard to tell what's going on. But just with that as the backdrop, this guy asks, who is the winner between these two women?
Who's the heroine of this one?
But he says, who is the winner?
Why?
And
so bad. This is
you can
so
tell.
bad.
I don't think it's that Barry Bands didn't watch the movie or wasn't briefed on it, but I think as a man in his 60s, or maybe he was like 30. Who knows?
I was gonna say this is the 80s, so he was probably 35.
But as a man who appeared through current eyes to be in his 60s, and it was in the 80s, he clearly did not have the vocabulary, the aptitude, the emotional range to discuss what this movie was about.
No.
And so then he just reverts to sports, and he asks who the winner is. She, to your point, was beyond a total pro. She did an incredible job finding a way to take these horrible questions.
Took this question, just answered it enough to pivot into an explanation about why this movie is important and why you should see it. And great job. Amazing job.
Yes. That said, we talk about Mount Rushmore.
Out of place.
Top 2 or 3 strangest things we've seen on any show that we've watched. And I think maybe the strangest outside of some of the weird commercials.
Yeah, that doctor segment was weird on that. What was that? Was that on Pro Wrestling This Week? Or
I think it was on Pro Wrestling This Week with Gordon Solie and Joe Pedicino.
Yeah, so
they were not the doctors, by the way.
No, between that doctor segment and this celebrity corner, wow, those were weird. So weird, out of place. We then go to
the only thing that the only thing you can do when you go from there, when you go from having Jodie Foster being interviewed by Barry Bands uncomfortably about a doctor, you go into another segment talking about Greg Gagne.
Well, yeah, we're talking about, this is the Matt Classic segment where he's usually joined by Greg Gagne, but he can't talk about this objectively. So Larry shows us the match where Ron Garvin defeats Greg Gagne for the TV championship. Gagne with just two terrible blocks and then puts Garvin in an Indian deathlock. We get a leapfrog by Garvin, and he collapses, holding his ankle. Garvin then goes into his tights, pulls out a weapon, hits the big punch, puts the weapon back into his tights, gets the pin. Incorrect all around. This is not a Matt classic in any sense.
I'll tell you what was great, though, and it made me want to see something coming up. Nothing from this match or about SuperClash III, but we get a TSN Sports update, as this was clearly a Canadian source videotape. So this was AWA on ESPN, but being broadcast on TSN in Canada. And it tells us that the Islanders will play the, quote, rough and tough Flyers tonight on TSN. And I'm hoping the file will extend and we get a chance to see that. Instead, though, we go to a not very good promo from Ronnie Garvin in studio. He says he will defend the international TV title at SuperClash. He doesn't say much else. We should also mention that these studio segments are very awkward because unlike, the NWA on TBS or Championship Wrestling from Florida or almost any other studio show that we've reviewed, when they're in studio doing these interviews, there's no crowd. It's just deathly still. I think the only thing that I could compare it to is some of those studio promos on that Smoky Mountain show that we reviewed. Late stage Smoky Mountain show where Jim Ross is interviewing people, but there's no crowd. It just feels weird.
Well, the weirdness continued because we go to the ring where we already told you, good sized crowd. And Greg Gagne comes out to no reaction whatsoever. These people did not care about Greg Gagne coming out.
No. And again, just think about the wrestlers that we've seen so far. They're either chiseled sculptures of human beings like Kerry Von Erich or even the jobber Scott Steiner, or they're rugged, tough men like Ronnie Garvin. Here, Greg Gagne, what he does in this match is totally fine. Like he's a competent grappler, but he just negative charisma, just a black hole. He looks like an incompetent middle manager in his underwear out there. Terrible haircut. It's not as if Vern Gagne was overflowing with physical charisma, but he was Vern Gagne and he had been Vern Gagne for so long that it didn't matter. Whereas Greg has none of that gravitas. And it's, there's one point where they start talking about the classic Gagne fire, and he throws these punches and Irish whips and backdrops and a drop kick, and there is no fire.
No, his opponent was a young Mike Enos. Enos, with the choking offense here, looked like he was straight out of 70s WWF.
Yes.
He charges in, eats a big boot by Gagne. Then out of the corner, we get a backdrop, a drop kick, and then Gagne puts on the sleeper for the win. The people are not impressed. He then goes to wake up Enos, because when you put a guy to sleep in the 80s, you have to wake them up. Otherwise, they'll stay asleep forever. And so to wake him up, I'm used to you sitting the guy up and then smacking him in the back, and that wakes him up. Here, he just slaps Enos in the face. This is not the proper way to wake someone up from a sleeper. You need to slap him in the back. Come on.
Well, first he massages the neck of Mike Enos here. Then he slaps him in. I guess if a slap could be sportsmanlike, that's what happened here. But yeah, there was not much to this. There's way too much Greg Gagne on this show. I'm sure you're shocked to hear that, knowing that his dad ran the territory. But this was not good. Greg Gagne was not the right guy for this position at all. And thankfully, I believe that's the last we see of him here on this episode of TV.
Back to the studio where Dave McClain comes out to talk about women's wrestling. And Dave McClain from Glow and Wow and Pow. He's been like, he was like the 80s like women's wrestling promoter.
He was Dave Prazak of the 80s, but not really.
But not really. Sorry,
Dave Prazak. You definitely are better than Dave McClain or David McBlain, whatever his name was here. He's the premier promoter of ladies wrestling Larry Nelson tells us, and he's representing the POW promotion. They are bringing their star power, if you want to call it that, to SuperClash as well.
There's going to be a women's battle royal, and we will learn the names next week.
He won't reveal the names until next week because that apparently is a hook to tune into ESPN next week and watch. Larry Nelson makes some like under his breath offhanded comment about David McBlain having the only legalized harem in the United States.
Kerry Von Erich cuts a promo about there being one world champion. This is not good.
It's also, again, awkward and unsettling because it's in this quiet, echoey studio. Not very good. What is good, though?
Oh, boy. Here we go. Main event time.
Talk about a collection of human beings. We have the Stud Stable, and I got excited when I heard that because
Me too.
What that meant
Rob Fuller, baby.
Robert Fuller, the future Colonel Robert Parker, a guy who we love here on this podcast. He would be a part of this. It is.
Wait, to be fair, to remind everybody who have not listened to the Continental Wrestling episode,
shame
I believe
on
in
you
season 2. If you have not listened to us review Continental Wrestling in season 2, pause this, go listen to it right now, because this is where we fell in love with the Tennessee stud Robert Fuller. I was never a Colonel Rob Parker fan. I didn't find him to be useful. I was uninterested in Colonel Parker. However, every time I see the Tennessee stud Robert Fuller, this guy is can't miss, must watch television. And he, like you mentioned, became a favorite of ours through this podcast because I had never gone back and watched any of his matches or his promos or his storylines. And seeing these shows, this guy's a super talent, and I'm always entertained.
I always enjoyed him more than you did, I think, as Colonel Rob Parker in WCW. But yes, he was certainly much better as the Tennessee stud Robert Fuller, leader of the Stud Stable at this time. The Stud Stable, what a collection of people, as I said. It is helmed by by the future Colonel Robert Parker, Rob Fuller, Jimmy Golden, who would go on to be Bunkhouse Buck in the Stud Stable later on in WCW. Wildfire Tommy Rich, freshly turned heel. And it's also great. I always enjoy when stables have two managers.
Yes.
And that is the case here, as it is a woman named Sylvia. And you guessed it, more Downtown Bruno content.
Yeah, Miss Sylvia, the real-life wife of Robert Fuller.
Well, there you go.
And Downtown Bruno, the mascot.
Wait, was she the one that he tried to push off on that terrible... Who was that like Bruiser whatever guy that was supposed to be like Bruiser Brody, but was just like Bob from accounting? Like, he was so generic.
That is exactly that story. Yes, from Continental. Yes. So drop what you're doing and go listen to that podcast, folks. Their opponents, the Stud Stable's opponents. Bill Dundee.
Talk about a collection of men. My God.
Someone fired up the randomizer to put together a team. We get superstar Bill Dundee, a very young Jeff Jarrett, and handsome Jimmy Valiant.
The boogie woogie man himself, Jimmy Valiant, without his beard. Fresh, clean shaven Jimmy Valiant is disturbing.
The announcers make fun of Tommy Rich being out of shape. Ouch. These digs, they stung. Whew.
Well, they stung, and they kept going on and on and on. And then at one point, you could sense that even Lee Marshall started to recognize, as he was saying these things, how overboard he was going, because then he started to say, oh, well, maybe this is intentional, and this is so he can get more of a physical advantage. But yeah, they're just talking about how they just flat out say how fat he is. Like, that's what they say.
Oh, and they basically and lazy. They're like, you get this way by not working out, not going to the gym. Like, I'm like, holy crap, dude.
And then they compare him to late stage Adrian Adonis.
Unbelievable. Yeah, they were. My God. Crazy.
This was not nice. What was nice was seeing Jeff Jarrett, young, fiery, babyface Jeff Jarrett. He was awesome here.
So
it's
good.
This
Again,
really...
we've seen him a couple of times as
Yes.
young, fiery babyface Jeff Jarrett. Always a pleasure.
Well, actually, think about that Continental show where they had that video package for Jeff Jarrett. And what was the footage they used? It was from AWA. Remember, there was even clips of him wrestling an older Nick Bockwinkel. And so here now, this is that stuff before he goes off to debut in Continental. But he looks tremendous. It's a really cool like front chancery suplex. He's running wild with drop kicks, and he just looks like a total star here.
Yeah, it's all Jeff Jarrett, then it's all Bill Dundee early. Rich gets Dundee in his corner, but Dundee quickly crawls to his own corner on his hands and knees to tag Jimmy Valiant in. Valiant gives...
Did you like the baseball reference here by Lee Marshall? He talked about speed has no slump
Yes.
when describing Jeff Jarrett and how he can always use that speed. There was a great spot here that I just want to bring up because it's one of those things that you never see it. I'm shocked. I guess no one else has the reason to go back and watch a show like this, but I'm shocked you don't see people doing it now. Bill Dundee goes for the backdrop. Jimmy Golden goes for the traditional counter to the backdrop, which is to kick the man in the chest as he's leaning forward. Bill Dundee then just backs up, and Golden, in the process of throwing this missed kick, goes flying up into the air and falls on his back. I love that.
That was great. Yeah, that should definitely be something that comes back. Valiant gives Sylvia a kiss on the outside. Jarrett's back in. He gets cut off by Golden. Jarrett reverses the suplex and tags Valiant back in.
Hold on. We got to go back and talk a bit about this hot tag from Jimmy Valiant. First, he tags in, and what is the first thing he does? He throws the ref high into the air.
Out of my way, ref.
High into the air and moves him out of the way as if this was not a disqualification. He then stomps on downtown Bruno's fingers as Bruno is leaning over on the apron, kisses Sylvia, runs into the ring after the heels chase him around the ring. This crowd is going nuts. And my notes just say, Jimmy Valiant is the personification of cocaine.
The Valiant just runs wild on all three guys. It breaks down with all six men in the ring. There's a sleeper by Jarrett. Dundee with a figure four on Fuller. Bruno comes in and he punches the referee a couple times. Sylvia accidentally hits Fuller with a kendo stick. Gorgeous Gary Young then hits the ring. He's not in this match. And then the babyfaces win by disqualification.
Well,
Brickhouse Brown hits the ring to make the save. And that's the end of our main event.
Well, there's some other weird stuff that goes on. There's some like random fan or a plant that we're supposed to believe is a fan that gets in the ring. They're tiny. They go after Bruno. Lee Marshall at one point yells, "We got to run in here," as Gary Young runs into the ring and starts punching a twitching, convulsing Boogie Woogie man. The most disappointing thing about this whole thing is that we get such little Robert Fuller stuff here.
Nothing.
The thing that is great though is there is no moment during this match where you don't hear grunting and groaning and yelling random words out Robert Fuller, whether he's in the ring, outside of the ring, legal, not legal. If you're listening with headphones on, you can hear him, but we got so little of what makes him great otherwise. I wanted to see him take wild, crazy bumps.
Yes.
Comedically selling for Jimmy Valiant. We did not get any of that.
We're told next week the Iceman King Parsons defends the Texas title against Michael P.S. Hayes.
Sign me up for that. As a kid who grew up on World Class, I could go for some 80s Iceman King Parsons versus Michael Hayes for the World Class Texas title.
And Wahoo McDaniel versus the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez. Go back to our Mid-Atlantic review, where you can hear all about Manny Fernandez's promo abilities.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that we did not get this the week after this TV that we just watched of AWA, because I bet there's a Manny Fernandez promo, and the only thing more awkward than Manny Fernandez clasped hands with Magnum TA screaming about mainlining the fans with fans screaming would be a Manny Fernandez promo like that in this echoey void studio.
In the empty studio, yeah.
Yes.
So that's the end of the show. Let's recap the rest of the SuperClash show, because this show is all about building to that show. And
let's read the names of the women's battle royal that David McLean / McBlain brought us. It is the Street Fight Lingerie Battle Royal is what they were going to be bringing people at the UIC Pavilion. The winner, the Syrian terrorist, defeated Bambi, Peggy Lee Leather, Lori Lynn, Brandy May, Malibu, who I'm hoping was the American Gladiator Malibu, who was a guy and was the weakest American Gladiator you've ever seen. If you were a fan of the original American Gladiators, it was hilarious. Malibu always got knocked off the pedestal, always lost the joust, could not do anything right. I don't think that was him here. Also, Nina, Pocahontas, and Luna Vachon.
Well, you skipped over Brandy May.
No, I mentioned Brandy May.
So she was, if you watched the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, she was Amy the Farmer's daughter on the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling.
And who didn't watch that growing up?
And of course, you would know Nina as the future Ivory.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So the future WWF, WWE wrestler Ivory was a glow wrestler Nina at the time. Pocahontas and, of course, Luna Vachon also in this battle royal. After that, we had Sergeant Slaughter defeating Colonel De Beers, who was, for some reason, managed by Diamond Dallas Page in a boot camp match.
Which has no time listed, which I assume means that much like some of those WWF matches from the 70s, time stopped as just went on and on and on. We then have, for the world-class tag team championships, it is the Samoan SWAT team, a young SST, at least a year removed from, or a year before they would show up in WCW and be managed by Paulie Dangerously. Here, they're managed by Freebird Buddy Roberts, and they defeat Freebird Michael Hayes and Steve Cox.
Steve Cox, he was a global wrestler for a little bit there.
Did Steve Cox also wrestle as Steve Casey? I feel, or is that a different guy?
That's a different guy.
Oh, okay.
Steve Cox was always wrestled as Steve Cox, but he did some UWF global world class.
I assume when you say UWF, you don't mean he was shooting with Maeda and Takada.
Not that one. We had an Indian strap match between Wahoo McDaniel defeating the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez, and of course
7 minutes and 48 seconds. We should mention again the Battle Royal 8:36, boot camp match time stood still, tag title match 7:53, Indian strap match 7:48, which brings us to the match everybody came for.
Obviously the main event, Jerry Lawler, the AWA champion, defeating Kerry Von Erich, the world-class champion, due to referee stoppage for the unification of the AWA and world-class titles. 18 minutes, 53 seconds on this one.
Was it due to blood? Was that the story with that?
I have no idea what happened with that. That's going to be that'll have to be a story for another day.
Maybe the referee stopped it because it went over 7 minutes and 53 seconds.
This is twice as long as any other match.
It went exactly 11 minutes longer than the tag title match, and maybe that was the time limit, unspoken, and they went over time, so the ref had to stop it. That somehow was not your main event, though.
Not the main event. So the actual last match of the evening was the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, defeating the Stud Stable, Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden with Miss Sylvia, and sending the fans home happy with a double disqualification.
Yeah, so they did not win. There was no winner here in the main event. 7 minutes of a double disqualification after a referee stoppage in the title unification.
Thanks for watching this pay-per-view. Yeah.
Yes. It's just, it's 45,000 people ordered this, which in modern times you'd think, oh, that's not terrible, but that was a blip on the radar back then.
Oh, yeah, so just a terrible show. Yeah, tough
Did you
times.
know that there was a SuperClash 4?
Stop it. Let's see. Oh boy.
SuperClash 4 in St. Paul.
1990.
Yeah, promoted by the AWA in April of 1990. And apparently, it says here on Wikipedia that it was added to the WWE Network. It's a hidden gem in September of 2019. So it is in play.
It's in play.
In the randomizer.
Don't say it too loud. We don't want the randomizer to hear that.
This is fascinating. The semi-main event. Talk about hearkening back to a New Japan Tokyo Dome show that we watched and reviewed relatively recently. Larry Zbyszko defeats Mr. Saito for the AWA title. I think that was the last ever AWA title change.
Yep, because Mr. Saito won that AWA title in a match we reviewed. And yeah, that's where it was a surprise, like, oh, holy cow, Mr. Saito won the AWA title. Was not expecting that.
This show had longer matches than SuperClash 3. The Trooper and Paul Diamond defeated Mike Enos and Wayne Bloom in a steel cage match in 24 minutes and 52 seconds in the main event of this show. Zbyszko and Saito went 16 minutes. A guy named Tommy Jammer wrestled Tully Blanchard in April of 1990 in a match that went 16 minutes.
Oh, 16 minutes.
Before Tully got the win. Also, John Nord, who would go on to be the Berserker in the WWF, defeated Kokina Maximus, who would go on to be Yokozuna.
So that's your Dying Days AWA Championship Wrestling on ESPN. A nothing show building up to a terrible pay-per-view in SuperClash 3. So
it was a totally watchable episode of TV, though. Like, it didn't drag.
No,
like maybe I expected it to.
The matches were short squashes, and yeah, it was fine. The studio stuff left a little to be desired for all the reasons you laid out. The format was weird. The execution was weird. That Jodie Foster segment was the weirdest.
Absolutely the weirdest. I also think the studio segments with Lee Marshall and Larry Nelson were filmed in a basement apartment because the glass block window treatment behind them was going hard.
Favorite thing about this episode?
It would be that backdrop spot, the backdrop counter spot that I talked about, where the counter kick and Bill Dundee moves out of the way, and when Jimmy Golden goes flying through the air, I would say that was the most entertaining thing on here.
Yeah, for me, I'd have to say I was kind of shook out of my haze of watching this when a young Scott Steiner appeared on my screen. So getting to see him in action as a jobber was pretty fun.
There's not a lot to choose from, even though the show wasn't a terrible watch. There's not a lot to choose from when on my side, it's a counter to a counter of a backdrop. And on your side, it's, I liked the jobber that got beaten a minute 52.
Worst thing on this show, longer list to choose from. Oh, sorry. Honorable mention for best thing for Kerry Von Erich coming out to Still of the Night.
Yes. I would say, I mean, I'm tempted to go with anything else, but to me, the worst thing on the show is the questions that Barry Bands asked Jodie Foster on the AWA Celebrity Corner. And I would say the most impressive performance of this show by far was Jodie Foster
MVP.
deftly handling those questions and turning it into something that somehow made sense.
Yes, there's no doubt Barry Bands is by far the worst thing on this show. Just embarrassing to the someone would representing a wrestling show would ask questions like this and comments like that. Just terrible. So that is that. We're going to call it a podcast. I do want to make mention of our Patreon. That's how you can support the show. We talked about a whole bunch of bonus content references. That's all available right now. You can unlock it for just $5. You go and sign up via patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, or in your Apple Podcast feed, click that subscribe button. It unlocks every single back episode of the bonus content. We're talking over 50-some episodes of bonus content available to you right now when you sign up at the Patreon. And another fun feature when you not only get that bonus content, but folks can upgrade for a month. You can say, you know what, this bonus content's been great. I really wish you guys would review this show. I really wish you'd review Halloween Havoc 90 because I want to hear about more about that show. You can bump yourself up to that $10 tier. You can be the randomizer, the executive producer. You call it the intentionalizer.
I do.
And you can choose what show you want us to watch. We'll review it. You bump yourself back down the next month to the $5 tier. Continue to get all of that bonus content. Or if we're behind some other new paywall of choice, all that content is there. It's evergreen. It's brand new to you. As soon as you sign up, patreon.com/wrestling at random. That's how we have this show free of charge, ad-free every single week, coming to you here because we're doing that support. We're doing the extra shows. We're getting that support over the Patreon feed. If you can't support us financially in these times, I get it as well. You can support us by telling your wrestling fan friends about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans. Tell your friends that used to be wrestling fans about the show. They might want to take a trip down memory lane with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. This thinking this hard about 1988 AWA has, while not stacks broken me, it's broken my creativity at the end of this show. I don't know. I can't imagine. Can you imagine having a friend who is a hardcore AWA fan? Like, can you imagine growing up and trading tapes or going to the grocery store with all your buddies to look at wrestling magazines? You ride your bike there and your friend, turns to you and says, check out this Colonel De Beers match.
Have you seen the new rankings in the AWA right now? All right.
You would not be friends. And I don't think this podcast here could bring that friendship back together. There are a lot of things in life that are forgivable. I don't know if that would be.
Well, asking them to give it a try would be less awkward than any question Barry Bands asked Jodie Foster.
There you go.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're calling it a podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Randomizer. I think this was fine.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.